all Hi guys. Happy Thursday. um I was having some technical issues. Hopefully I have solved my problem with my AV. Okay, Druid says good. And I'm loud enough, but it's not blowing your eardrums out. I just want to make sure. Um had some tech problems on Tuesday with my audio, and I don't know how this stuff happens, but I did some adjustments and okay, sounds good. All right. I don't know how these things happen. Technology just wants to be a turd sometimes. So, it's Thursday. Oh my gosh. I don't have a whole lot to say up front here other than um we're gonna knock out the last few quilts that we want to look at that I was supposed to finish on Monday. Ah! And then remind you guys that we have a stitch and glitch. Jill and I are going to do a stitch and glitch on Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So if you follow us over there on Quilt Nerding on YouTube, be sure to stop by if you can. We usually start at 2 p.m. Eastern time and go until we're hungry. I'll be at my mom's, so I will be coming to you from a secret location, but not really because it's my mom's house. So yeah, don't forget about that. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? I think that's the big one. We will also be starting reading the reading of our next book. It is Commemorative American Quilts by Sandra Sider. If you don't have it yet, snag it on Amazon. It's so good. The link, we have a little affiliate link. If you go over to YouTube and look at one of our latest videos over there, Quilt Nerding, you'll see the link there. So snag a copy of it. I know lots of folks are buying it. Lots of folks are reading it. I can't wait. So good stuff. This commemorating our 250th year of this little democracy experiment. I've said that a couple times, and I realized that I think here in the U.S., I don't know that it's necessarily like a very common, our little experiment, but I hear it enough that I think people generally get it when, we talk about we have this experiment and what the founding fathers were doing. But I realized that people from outside the U.S. are sometimes confused by it. And I'm like, well, we're always talked about, kind of, that it's an experiment in, how democracy and a republic works. So sometimes we are doing well with the experiment, sometimes not so great. But yeah, I'm not here to poke any bears. So let's go ahead and jump over and look at these quilts. So as a reminder, these are the community quilts from QuiltCon. These are the group quilts. They're made by various guilds, and they had 2 different color palettes to choose from. We did the brights, which were like pink, teal, green. We did all that last week. And then we've got the blues now. And I did a very bad job on Monday of getting through all the blues. There were less blues than the bright palette, I think. But somehow, I just did not do my timing well. So we're going to look through these. There's about 10 of them. And then we will do some reading. So this is where we left off. And let me grab my notes here, which I should have pulled up beforehand. Whoops. So I noticed you guys were talking about the temperatures. Robin, oh my gosh. We had that one day, I think it got up it was like 78 degrees here, which I certainly enjoyed, after the snow. But yeah, it only lasted for one day. And then, we're back to kind of the regular temperatures. We're kind of having a cold snap though this week. I think today is probably average. But the other day it was like 27 degrees. And yeah, it's frustrating to say the least, right? um, we just want to have a nice normal spring. So, um, yeah, okay. And then Druid, yeah, her friend in Arizona, record-breaking temps over 100. Yeah, I know some people in Arizona, and yeah, I know Arizona's always hot. It's always hot there, but particularly now, it sounds like it's unbearable. Of course, I've been following the Nancy Guthrie case since the very beginning. And I always watch the news people out there. This one guy that I think he's back in his home state now, but he was always looking for shade and stuff. So, um, Jared says it was really cold on Monday and Tuesday and windy, warmer today. Yeah. And I mean, to me, like, this is March, and what's the saying? The March is always comes in like a lion, out like a lamb. And then April, it's supposed to rain. April showers bring May flowers. I don't think any of that is true anymore. And I don't know, it's climate change. This is an El Nino year, right? So I think that's definitely, yeah. Oh, had to drain the pool. Yeah. The weather, it's just, it's crazy. It's sometimes it's hard to have that like not weather was like always the thing that you could have some small talk about, and it's like, oh, rainy for you, oh, cold for us. But yeah, like the weather is so intense now. It's not just a fun little chat anymore. Okay, look at this beautiful quilt. So this one is by it's called Blue Ridge Star, and it is by the Roanoke Modern Quilt Guild, and their handle is Roanoke MQG. I think most of these guilds have pretty easy to remember handles. What's interesting, they have just a very basic statement here. It says members of the Roanoke Modern Quilt Guild worked together to design and construct this quilt using paper piecing and curve sewing skills we've been refining in guild workshops over the last few years, which is wonderful. I think that's great. Like we had looked at other quilts that said, our guild retreat, our classes, workshops that we've had, and we utilized the pieces or the skills we learned there to make our community quilt. And I love that. This quilt also, so Roanoke is, of course, if you're not aware, is in Virginia. And it's a part of Virginia that I have not spent a whole lot of time in. My husband, for a while, went to college down there. He went to Roanoke College. And there is a star on one of the mountains down there. It is a man-made thing. But they light it up. It's very cool. It's a landmark down there. And so this kind of, to me, as a Virginian, is kind of alluding to that. They don't say it specifically, but I can't imagine Blue Ridge Star is not at least giving a little bit of nod to that sort of local thing. So what I also thought was really interesting, and I pulled this up, is, whoops, this one. They look a lot alike, do they not? Let me put them side by side. Look at the, oh, good gracious. Click, Stephanie. But look at the commonalities here. Right? Very interesting. And these quilts, and let me see I can't remember who this one is. Okay, this one was the Porcelain Medallion by the Corvallis Modern Quilt Guild, and if I remember correctly, Corvallis is that Oregon? It's either Oregon or Washington. So a good chance that neither of these guilds knew each other, yet they created something that I think, I mean, it's certainly not identical in any way, but the vibe here is very similar. Um, this one's got a lot more going on in it, like in terms of piecing. This one is much more simple, but you can definitely see it's got very similar vibes. And so many of the guilds used these, stars, points, um, New York Beauty type blocks, and so on. And I just thought that was so interesting, right? Um, and it's that certainly that idea of stuff can spring up, um, without contact. Things can, ideas can spring up independently. And, when you're working with quilt patterns, you know, I think it's easy for, things to look similar because I mean, they're while I think quilts are an endless possibility for what you can do with a quilt, there are also themes, and especially, a showplace like QuiltCon, I think that the sort of the brain trust of the guilds, could start to have some similar thought processes and end up with things like this. So, right, Robin, it is really interesting. And when you go to local shows, you might notice like the multiple quilters maybe have made the same pattern or their quilts look similar, and you think, oh well, they're in the same guild or they're in a neighboring guild. They probably know each other. They've maybe been, influenced each other. But sometimes not. And I think that's really fascinating. And, historically, in terms of quilt study, when we look at old antique quilts that don't have provenance, that, we're trying to suss that out. Or maybe we have one quilt that we know the maker, but then there's this other quilt that kind of came from the same geographic area and it's got similarities. Was it made by the same person, or was it made by somebody that had contact with the other person? We always ask these questions, and sometimes I think we can come to the conclusion that yes, indeed, there is, within a community, you've got women that knew each other and made quilts, and influenced each other. And in other cases, it is impossible to show that there was any connection. And so, you wonder, did the one person see the other person's work, even if they didn't know them? Are their communities close enough, back historically, would they have been close enough to have seen each other? It's just a really interesting question to ask. And, it kind of goes back to that idea of like, nothing, was it nothing old or everything old is new again or something like that, that saying. As human beings, I think we often will come up with similar ideas, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that shows something about us as humans, and says something about the way our minds work. So, okay, this is the next one, and let's look at who made this one. Okay, so this one is called Dis-Centered. This one, I think, out of all of them, the is a big question mark as far as where's the medallion. Let's read what they said. So this is by Rhine MQG. So RHEIN MQG. Their handle is RHEIN_MQG. I'm not sure. Let's see. I don't know where that is. I don't know if Rhine is a city. I don't know, but let's read the information. This quilt reflects society. We are used to a firm framework, democracy. Our values and rules are dissolving, like the borders of the medallion. We took them for granted. People are diverse and should live in peace. The world became fragile. The order is out of joint. But it's there. The medallion isn't exactly in the center. Dis-centered isn't a word showing how extraordinary times are. Let's protect the system that protects us. So I guess the question is, where is the medallion? I think the answer, I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? Okay, so Druid is saying that they're in Raleigh. Okay. I'm not sure what to say the medallion is. I mean, and saying that a medallion is square, it could barely be anything here. I don't know. There's a lot of these clusters of blocks. I could say, well, that's probably the medallion there. That's probably the medallion. But I don't know. I think anything could be like this could be the medallion. This pattern of circles. This could be the medallion because I mean, I think that, based on this quilt reflects society. Yeah. It's kind of a discentered. It is maybe a bit jumbled. It's interesting. I'll have to come back to this one and think more about it. Because I really couldn't tell you what the intended center is. What is the medallion? Okay. Check this out. This one's fun. I love the wonky. I love wonky stuff. Wonky stars, wonky log cabins. I mean, I think that's essentially maybe what this is. Let's see. We zoom in and look. I think these are wonky frames. I don't know that I would not. I don't think it's fair to call this a log cabin because it's not. The way this is constructed. So that and then that and then that. When you look at log cabins, you kind of, try to follow like what the piecing order was. I guess this could be a log cabin. Yeah, I guess it is a log cabin. I'm looking at these like there's nothing that's inset here. So yeah, so these are wonky log cabins, I guess. And then how fun, I mean, they definitely all the movement, and in this case, the quilting is just very horizontal lines, very simple. Which for a more is more person, also, I think that this allows the piecing here to shine versus the quilting itself. So Robin is seeing one in LA area. How to translate the page because it's in German. Yeah, that's the thing. Rhine, Rhein. I mean, that gives me German vibes. So, okay. So I talked about this and I didn't tell you who made it. So this is called Lancaster Blues. And it is by the Lancaster Modern Quilt Guild. And that would be in Pennsylvania, I think. I knew there was a Lancaster in Massachusetts. We talked about that a while back. With Jill and some other folks that are from Massachusetts, they pronounce the one in Pennsylvania wrong. If you, when you're talking about the Amish area of Pennsylvania in southeast area of the state, it's Lancaster. And then you could say Lancaster in other places. Okay. So their handle is at Lancaster, Lancaster, MQG. Lancaster Blues is an original design by Maureen Logan. Maureen is well known within our guild and beyond for her beautiful original designs. Her design, Tropical Twist, was featured in QuiltCon magazine 2022. In addition, Lancaster MQG's Community Outreach Quilt of 2024 was featured in QuiltCon magazine. Lancaster Blues was made with paper piecing. Oh, okay, so they're technically not, I mean, they're wonky, but they're paper pieced, so they're not improv. So made with paper piecing. Many members created blocks, and we held a sew day to assemble our quilt top together. Long arm quilting by Cindy Carey. So yeah, this is just a fun quilt. And I love piano key stuff. So whether it's piano key quilting, I mean that's essentially what visually you see here on the outside border, but just these stacks of rectangles, alternating, making piano keys, essentially. But I guess I see the symmetry in this. I can see how the pattern worked. These would have been, paper templates, and then you're laying your fabric on top and stitching through the paper and then you open your seams out. But it creates these wonky log cabins. And I really like that. I think it's cool that they used, with many people contributing, that they used a pattern, because they do end up getting something that's symmetrical. I mean, you can see the wonkies. They face each other. They're symmetrical is what I'm trying to say here. Yeah, definitely. As you look at each of these, it's the flip of its opposite, I guess. Pretty neato. All right, look at this. There is a historical quilt that this looks like. And for the life of me, I keep looking at it going, I should know. What is that quilt? So this is what they say. This is by Block Association. You zoom out a little bit so you can see the top and bottom. And this just gives a list of names. And I'll read them in a second. But their commentary is this. You know when you see a quilt that seems really obsessive, maybe by a Victorian sailor or a maker in Maine who spent a dozen winters on a single quilt? Our group got together to create the illusion of insanity by applying economies of scale. By dividing the work among a whole bunch of us, we aimed for a dizzying effect without repetitive stress. Quilted by Caroline Anderson. And then these are the names that are involved. Caroline Anderson, Dawn Ford Arno, Brian Beardsley, Maren Berthelsen, Deborah Semmel Bingham. Some of these names sound familiar. Diana Cherry Holmes, Cynthia B. Clark, Bruce Goldstone, Maria Eugenia Gualdoni, Christine Genove, Emily Schuff Kleinberg, Lori McFadden, Andrea Murray, Sam Gans Panzer, Vicky Plybon. Vicky. Oh gosh, it's an interesting name. It's like Vicky, but it's got a DY on the end. Plybon, Jean Revelle, and Lisa Vosper. So these people, I assume, they make up something called Block Association. There's no handle for it. So I'm not sure where they're from, but yes, that's what I have to say in response to their comment. And as you go in here, I mean, it's just not an economy block, but it's a simple block. It's got a center, it's got two borders, and they're very tiny. And it seems like they chose what the color would be for each block, the color placement. And then they designed this. My guess is it was probably laid out like on graph paper. That makes the most sense to me. And then determining where each of these went. And then I love the fact that, for the most part, the quilting are these horizontal lines, but then on the outside, you've got these little swirls. The outer edges of this one are a teeny bit wonky in terms of it lying flat. And I think that is because of all of these itty bitty blocks. They're tiny. And they create that sort of funkiness. Sometimes we've seen lots of historic quilts that have that problem. On a bed, it doesn't matter as much. You just really notice it when it's hanging, that it's a little funky. That doesn't bother me at all about a quilt. I know from the perspective of you look at these really highfalutin quilt shows. And I promise I'm really not throwing shade. Whatever the focus is in determining what makes a great quilt in a particular quilt show, that's up to the creators of the show. If they decide that, stitches per inch and the quilts have been blocked so that they hang perfectly square and all that, if that's the importance in the show, great. If it's more about the ideas and the visual appeal, etc., also love that. So it doesn't bother me when a quilt isn't like blocked and perfect. Um, I like this one. I think it's, it's one of those more is more situations. Okay, next. Um, this one is fun because I, I probably beat the horse dead about this, but the drunkard's path blocks. The way that you put those together, they become very abstract in this one. And then of course we've got some geese, but they're funky geese. They're not exactly like our normal um, geese. In fact, I guess you could probably just call these triangle blocks. They're not necessarily would be geese. And then you've got of course half square triangles, and then these simple shapes. I really love the quilting on this one. That it is not it's not a cable, although it looks like it. And it's got this really interesting like path that it takes because it's obviously long armed. But the path that this takes and then moves on to the next one. The shape is called OG, OGEE. And in terms of like, I guess if you would call it tessellation. So tessellation meaning how shapes fit together. The OG tessellation is an odd one. So when you talk about, say, any other kind of motif in a surface design, you've got like the like the bricked pattern, like where you're going kind of like, you know, a half a block down, and up. If you guys kind of understand what I'm saying, like, imagine taking a rubber stamp and going like, 1, 2, 3, 4 across. That's like a regular brick pattern or square pattern, I guess. And then when you have it like kind of halfway offset, that's like the brick pattern. Think about a brick wall. The bricks are sort of offset for the strength of the wall. So that's like a brick pattern. And there's just other types of layouts again like that, perfectly lined up, columns and rows. And then the OG is it creates like a diagonal when you look at it. Even though these are lined up side by side, the way the next one fits in underneath, it has to have round aspects of it to do that. I don't know if I'm using the right words. I've taken a couple of surface design classes, and the OG is really kind of like the hardest one, when you're manually designing. So I just like that quilting pattern. It's pretty cool. I guess I should probably tell you who made this one. So this one is called All Roads Lead to Carolina. And this is by Triangle MQG. So that's their handle, Triangle MQG. I'm assuming this means the by Triangle they're talking about it's Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill is it's the triad there, the like technology triangle there in Raleigh. So they say our quilt honors all the colors of blue in Carolina. And we talked about this the other day when I could not remember all the colleges. They say the pale blue of UNC, the royal blue of Duke, the dusty blue of the mist on the Smoky Mountains, and the dark blue of our gorgeous ocean fronts. Over 20 guild members contributed to the piecing. It was quilted by Megan Morris, and her handle is at Piece of Quiet Quilts, and it's PIECE of Quiet Quilts. Our guild donates quilts to the Durham Foster Program, and this year we'll donate over 50 quilts. So that's cool. So I guess they're charity focus, and if you've never belonged to a guild, many of them have a charity focus. So it sounds like they're making quilts for the foster care program in their area. So very cool. And, another one with the offset medallion, and it's like you could almost imagine like this is a quarter of a quilt. You could continue this and make it, make the medallion centered if you visualized that. This is another one of those more is more deals. I love it. Um, you've got these um, drunkard's path, these kind of wonky, different size drunkard's paths in here. Got these hourglass blocks, these wonky squares. These look like slashed blocks. So much of this stuff that we've seen over and over in a lot of these quilts um, are simply the movement of modern quilting. These are the things that are being taught to newer modern quilters. They're skills building. That's what I see in a lot of these. So this one is called, this is the Philadelphia Modern Quilt Guild. Their handle is Philly, Philly, MQG. And they call this Philadelphia Navy Yard. And what they have to say, the Philadelphia Modern Quilt Guild collaborated on this modern rendition of a medallion quilt with 26 of our talented members taking part in whichever sections suited their individual skills. While we kept it intentionally wonky, we feel this is a representation of the greatness we can accomplish when we each contribute a little something that we are good at. The name is reference to a Philly landmark shot through with blue, the Navy Yard. So yeah, I think that's cool. They're talking about, there's a lot of wonkiness going on in here. This little quadrant here, that looks like that wonky hexagon quilt where it was like the very first one I showed you on Monday. And it's the one where I missed getting a picture of the placard, although I think it might have been Oklahoma. But these look like pentagons, I think, but they're like fractured, and it's it's a modern quilting take on those sort of standard pieces that we know. Yeah, I think just about everything in this one is pretty wonky. Some of these hourglasses are sort of, buttoned up looking, but many of them are wonky, and I love that. I just think there's just something so lovely about wonkiness. And even if and this one I think it hangs pretty straight, but even when the wonkiness results in some rippling or weirdness in your quilt, I don't think that matters. At least to me, it doesn't. Doesn't make it any less of a beautiful work of art. This I thought, this center piece here, this border with the drunkard's paths and these sort of diagonal corner pieces, I really like this. It just speaks to me, for all its kind of, lack of symmetry. It's still really, really cool. I mean, an intentional lack of symmetry, of course. Alrighty, moving on to the next one. Check this out. Which I can see. Okay, this one's called Do Your Thing. Do Your Thing by Omaha Modern Quilt Guild. And their handle is Omaha MQG. The Omaha Modern Guild, I think they meant the Modern Quilt Guild, used the medallion quilt as an opportunity to create something using a round robin. One quilter created the center, then 7 more individuals from our guild each added their own twist on what came next. The round robin gave each quilter the chance to do her own thing. Custom quilted by another member and bound by a 10th, our collective creativity highlights what can happen when individuals collaborate on a project. So I think this is not the only round robin medallion. There were several others that indicated they had done this. But how fun. I mean, this is almost quasi, a round robin is sort of a quasi exquisite corpse, with the difference that you do see the work of the person before you. But we still don't know what the end is going to look like, because everybody's contribution is sort of secret from everyone else's. Now, I'm sure they worked closely on this, so there was a little less surprise by the time they got to the end. But I still think it's pretty incredible that you have a bunch of different people working on this and adding their flair, and it comes together in the end and is a beautiful quilt. I like this border particularly because it is very lacking in symmetry. But it's very striking. And I like what they did here. This one's also very cool. It gives me like plaid, leaded glass windows kind of vibe. Another very cool one. Let's see. Robin says, do these community quilts go through the same type of review that the other quilts do? No, I don't think so. They may have somebody that looks at them and like if there's truly like a problem, like a guild sent something that, the Modern Quilt Guild's like, oh, what are you thinking there? But I think for the most part, the guilds apply, and I think they know what they're getting, but I don't necessarily think that they would say like, oh no, we're not going to hang that, in the same way that they might with individuals. And that's also another reason why typically this group of quilts, there's so many of them. Just wondering because there seems to be a lot of similar types. Yeah. But and yes, I agree with that. I also think it goes back to that idea of, they're looking for things where they can balance the newbies with the experienced quilters. Their work can sit side by side in the same piece. A lot of guilds work on skills building type workshops and stuff. So I think that those two things contribute to a lot of like sameness. But yeah, I don't think that there is no jurying process for these. I don't think. Now I could be wrong. Somebody please tell me if I'm wrong about that. But yeah. And I mean, I honestly, all of the quilts, there was not a single quilt where I thought, oh, why'd they let this in? Every last one of them I thought was fantastic. I just noticed there's words in here. Find your magic. Let's see. Do your thing. Live life big. Always be you. That's cool. Okay, so maybe this border is my favorite. These are all so great. Okay. Check this out. More geese. Everybody loves the geese. Okay. So this is called Interplay. It is by the Lynchburg Modern Quilt Guild. They don't provide a handle, but I'm assuming we're talking about Lynchburg, Virginia. Although, is there a Lynchburg in Tennessee or Kentucky? Lynchburg, Tennessee. I don't know. Gosh, I'm so bad with geography. Robin and I go way back with our dates and stuff. She mentioned the other day that I need like a world map to help me too. Okay, so they say, in our guild, the concept of interplay is beautifully woven into the fabric of our community, where sharing knowledge, ideas, and fabric scraps is in our heart. Much like borders blending in the negative space and inset circles pieced with leftovers, our collective community thrives on collaboration. So yeah, this, yeah, they don't give a whole lot of, give us a whole lot of idea of how they, they split the work up, but I'm wondering if this one is kind of like a round robin situation too. It's interesting. This is one where I almost want to sit there and like kind of like visually take it apart. Like what are the blocks here? These circles are their own like long skinny blocks maybe, or no? I see seams here that I'm not expecting to see. So interesting how they constructed this. Ah, there is a Lynchburg in Tennessee. Okay. And aren't they close? I think they might be close together too, because Lynchburg, Virginia is kind of down. If you think of Virginia like as a big weird foot, It's like down in the toe. That's, yeah, the Jack Daniels distillery is there. I should know that. Yeah. So I guess this could be either Lynchburg, Virginia or Lynchburg, Tennessee. I think they're both prominent enough cities in their respective states. Very cool. I like the quilting on that one too. Check this out. This one is called Blue Odyssey. This is by the North Jersey Modern Quilt Guild, and their handle is at NJMQG. Very simple. And their statement is a medallion quilt in shades of blue by members of the North Jersey Modern Quilt Guild. My guess is that either nobody wrote a statement or somebody at the last minute had to dash something off there. This has got a lot of really interesting quilting in it. Look at this. This is like this, there's an 8-hour drive between the two Lynchburgs. I did not know that. I don't know why. I guess in my mind, I thought they were closer together. You know, like the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I don't know. This is definitely like a feather vibe to me, but look how they're like, they come to points. They're more like leaves than feathers. And this is interesting, like very tiny quilting in here. These lots of cool textures. And I really like the stars, these Ohio stars. It's a really nice. And then what they did here with these arrows, or I guess it would be considered like an arrow. Very nice. Very nice. Check this out. This one, I had to sit there and I looked at it and I'm like, how? Like, how did they get all this to fit together? And I also like the quilting on this one. This all over pattern is a pretty cool pattern. Yeah, this one, simple yet not at all. The scale on these half square triangles and how pretty wild. So this one is called Feeling Blue, and it is the Mexico Modern Quilt Guild. So their handle is Mexico Modern Quilt Guild. And what they say, blue often speaks of sadness, of being subdued under the weight of the world. In this quilt, however, blue turns luminous. Each shade holds its own rhythm, tone, and direction, yet together they create movement, balance, and unity. What might evoke heaviness instead becomes radiance, a reminder that even in turbulent times, harmony and strength can arise from collective vision and shared effort. A meditation on resilience, transformation, and the beauty of togetherness. So yeah, and you know, it's interesting. I did not think about this before, but knowing that this is from Mexico, if you've ever read anything about Frida Kahlo and her the Blue House, you know that, and I can't remember what city it's in, but that, you know, that idea of the you know, the house was like one of those whitewashed type of stucco houses, but it had been painted, I don't know if it was the interior is all blue, or I don't think it's the exterior. But anyway, just this blue, to me, this palette does not say sadness to me. I mean, we use the term blue to mean sad, and blue can have sort of a calm sadness to it. But you know, this color palette to me is very dynamic. You know, and whoever chose it. And then, are we on the last one? We are. So this was the quilt that was, you know, front and center there when you walked into the room, and it is by South Bay Area Modern Quilt Guild. Their handle is SBAMQG. Bay Area, I'm going to assume, is San Francisco. Ah, the Blue House is in Mexico City. Okay. I feel like I should have known that, but for some reason I was thinking of one of the little, those little small towns. So Bay Area, I'm assuming is San Francisco. So they say, living near the ocean, our guild was inspired by the blues palette. A number of our members have an affinity for Japanese culture, so we decided to base our design on blocks created by Susan Briscoe from her book Japanese Quilt Blocks. A steering committee designed the quilt, and members of the guild contributed blocks. The lovely Sashiko border was done by Gain Barlow Kemper. The quilting was completed by Sarah Roche. So this is the Sashiko down here, I think. Yeah, right here. And this is this stitching. I think this is just the pattern that's on the fabric. Yeah, that's the fabric itself. Is the Sashiko up here too? Yeah. Yeah, I like how they integrated that hand stitching in there. And it's interesting. I would love to know, was this added? How is this added? Was it like the last thing on the quilt because it's this outer border, or is it even quilting? Is it stitching that then has maybe some quilting to hold it together? I don't know. It's hard to tell, but I suspect it looks to me like there's some quilting in here. Because I could see this depression that does not closely follow the Sashiko line. So I think that there is quilting alongside that stitching. I wish I'd gotten a closer picture of that. Another more is more. I love the curvy pieces here. This part of the border. And I mean, you could see there's like this very offset kind of look here. It's another kind of wonkiness about it. Get Japanese culture that's so wabi-sabi that they use. It's kind of, I can't remember how it translates, but it's essentially like, what is. It just it comes together. And I don't know if that accurately really describes how they've utilized the different sections, but I like it. So yeah, you could see some outlines. Yeah, right. Well, that is it, you guys. That is the last one. So sorry it took me a really long time to get through all that. I can look at quilts and talk about them all day long. So you guys know how it is. I washed my bangs this morning and they ain't just not cooperating. Might be time for another haircut. Yeah. Okay. Next, I'm gonna get into some American quilts. So, we are on section 4, I think. Yes, part 4. Last time so I guess this was last week, I guess. We started sources of design in the American quilt and quilt names. So there's a big chunk of this chapter that I didn't read to you because it's just repetitive, names of things. And it's really funny to me, and I think I've mentioned this a couple times over the years, that these early writers, these early quilt writers. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Robin. Like I said, the catalog there. I think April is when I last saw that they said they would be offering the catalog, and the catalog is a full accounting of all the quilts, including these. And I think it's so cool that they have begun doing that. So you literally have like a record of every single quilt that was there, whether you were able to go or not. So yeah, I think the community quilts just don't get, I think the notoriety they deserve, during all of the excitement of QuiltCon. So yeah, that's why I really felt compelled to talk about them, versus some of the really stunning individual quilts. I mean, I certainly not to take away from those, but all right, recombobulate my desk here. Okay, so as a reminder, what we are reading is American Quilts by Elizabeth Wells Robertson. She was a school teacher in Chicago, and I eventually became a arts in education administrator. I'm still working on my research about her. I've kind of take a little teeny bit at a time reading newspaper articles about her. And she really was an interesting lady. I think she was one of those people that maybe was a little bit before her time. I think she probably would have really thrived in today's day and age, the way that she looked at women's place, a woman's place in this being, a traditionally women's art form, making quilts, just the way she looked at things artistically. I think you could kind of see that in her training. So, okay. Without further ado, let's get back into it. So as a reminder, we are reading American Quilts by Elizabeth Wells Robertson. It was published in 1948. Uh-oh. Druid said her computer is glitching. Is that a local problem for Druid, or is anybody else experiencing anything funky? Just let me know. Everything looks stable on my end, so sorry, Druid, it might be you. But keep me posted. Look at my eye trained there on the chat. So let's see. Section 4 is called Sources of Design in the American Quilt and the Quilt Names. And we left off at this part called Derivative Designs. Utility crew. Yeah, probably. Okay, derivative designs. And what I've got up here are some toile panels that are later in the book. So we could just kind of have some of these up on the screen to look at. I'll go back to this one for a while. Okay. Derivative designs. Quilts shared in the great interest of the American people in all crafts, an interest which developed steadily and consistently for many years after the Revolution. Inspiration for design was the same in nearly all of the crafts, and often one craft would provide design for another. Indeed, the craftsmen themselves were so adept that they worked in more than one medium. For instance, Paul Revere not only made fine silver, but very good engravings. The furniture painters of Pennsylvania made Proctor drawings and watercolor paintings. Carriage makers and chair makers carved figureheads for ships, as well as exquisite fireplace frames and moldings for rooms. Ironworkers and village blacksmiths made well-designed weather vanes and stovebacks. Sign and coach painters also painted chairs, chests, and other furniture. Housewives papered and painted the walls of rooms, stenciled beds, made rugs and quilts. All of this is surely indicative of the fact that early in its history, America had its own folk art. And she is correct about that. I think that we know this. All of the studies that have happened since 1948 certainly underscore this. Strong national influences appeared in early American crafts. The Pennsylvania Dutch, or Pennsylvania German, represented one of the most vital sources in regional art. Their chests, made of white oak, yellow pine, and tulip wood, were painted dusty red, and many had a wealth of ornamentation, especially on the front panels. The German love for sentiment is reflected in the hearts, entwined initials, and scrolls that often appeared. The beauty of these painted designs is recognized by present-day designers, as it was then by quilt makers and other craftsmen who derived inspiration from them. It was not a difficult task for any woman to redraw the tulip from one of the dower chests, reorganize the design, and place it in blocks on her quilt top. Now, it's interesting because, Ruth Finley, of course, the second earliest writer of this gang of writers from the early 20th century, she talked about the Pennsylvania Germans and specifically their quilts, and she was not nice about them. She thought that the color combinations were garish. It seems to me that Elizabeth Robertson looks at that, in not just the quilts, but all of the other folk art, inspired by the Pennsylvania Dutch, as well as the Pennsylvania Dutch work themselves. She seems to have a better understanding of, folk art and sort of the artistic experience of this stuff. As much as I love Ruth Finley, she was a journalist. She was not an artist. She was not a quilt maker. Whereas Elizabeth Robertson was an artist, was a trained artist, and she did make at least one quilt we know of that's at the Art Institute of Chicago, but also likely other quilts. And she studied quilts extensively. So while I can see, and hopefully you can too, if you've, remember listening to me read those other books, you can see how they all tend to influence each other in their writing as you go through through the early 20th century. Okay. Stenciled walls, floors, and furniture offered source material of a geometric nature. The designs for the stencil were especially suited to quilts because of the simplification demanded of the stencil technique. The earliest recorded example of a stenciled wall was believed to have been made in 1778. I can't imagine that there weren't something before then, and that we haven't identified something earlier than that. I mean, 1778. That's after. I mean, that's just post-revolution, certainly, or maybe not. I mean, in terms of the dates that the Pennsylvania Germans, arrived, that may have something to do with that. So these designs, no doubt, were in turn suggested by borders and panels of the elaborate and expensive wallpaper brought over from France and England. The background for the stencils was usually pale pink, pale blue, pale ochre, or light gray. These are Federalist colors, by the way. My house was built in 1853, I think. But the people that owned the house before us, they loved, the historical kind of stuff. And they used, there's a lot of pale blue and gray paint in my house. And my bedroom walls are this horrific ochre peach color. And I've never repainted them, just because painting these walls is a little bit more complicated than painting, a younger house. So, I just lost my place. Okay. Trailing vines formed borders. Here again, the bellflower used on quilts and on pressed glass appeared. Borders of climbing roses with laurel leaves were often used. Swags with bells or tassels were favorite motifs for friezes. Stenciled in all-over patterns were leaves and flowers, pine trees, festoons, and geometric forms. Birds, plants, and animals were placed in all sorts of arrangements. Urns and simplified baskets were used. Rosettes, discs, hearts, pineapples, stars, diamonds, all supplied interesting units to wall decorations, and all gave the quilt maker ideas for patterns. Heraldic designs were sometimes used on walls in ornate frescoes painted about 1796 to 1803. The main difference between these fresco paintings and stenciling lay in the fact that frescoes were done freehand, while the stencil limited the artist to simple, flat designs. So it's interesting that she's giving this very narrow 7-year date for frescoes, heraldic designs in frescoes. I don't know what that time frame is. That's and really what she's referring to specifically. Painted and stenciled designs on such small objects as tin tea caddies and trays might also have been inspirational material, easy to adapt to quilt blocks and borders. Um, you know, here she's talking about, I mean, really focusing on the Pennsylvania Dutch, um, and its surrounding areas. But I mean, I guess I struggle when she's, what she's describing here again is like such a very specific area of the United States, at a time when there's a whole lot of other stuff on the East Coast, where they would have been, her concept here about how they are inspired is certainly, solid, legitimate, but her focus here on the Pennsylvania German, I think is leaving a lot out, perhaps. Another design source for the quilt maker was the stove back. Many fine designs were molded and cast in iron. The units were mostly rosettes with simple mottled vine borders. Well, that's weird. I don't know if this is a typo, if there's text missing. Because the units were mostly rosettes with simple mottled vine borders, comma. The next page says, the tailor's stove shows a low relief in the front panel, which might easily have been adapted for a quilt design. I think there might be a part of a sentence missing there. It's funny. I hear a lot of people will point out and mention when there's typos in published books. In fact, the book that Jill and I are getting ready to read, as our book club over on Quilt Nerding, has one major problem in that, and to me, it's not a major problem, although from an educational standpoint, it is kind of a problem. There are 2 quilts where the caption is reversed, like one quilt has this other quilt's caption, so the names of the quilts are missing, and much ado is made about that. But if you really spend time reading historical books, as we have, I can pick out, I think literally every single one of these historic books has something wrong. And it might be something like very, very tiny and insignificant. But for instance, I don't know if you guys remember the Dr. Dunton's book. My copy of it does not have a dust jacket, but once I started doing my research into him, and discovered the dust jacket that was printed and was on all 2,000 of his books, spelled his last name wrong. And I mean, we're talking about the man spent a lot of money on this book, and you would have thought somebody would have noticed at some point that the dust jacket had his name wrong, but they didn't. And to me, that's far worse than some of the other problems that I've seen in books. So anyway, it is not a new problem that there are sometimes typos and mistakes in books. Stuff happens. Human beings are responsible for all of this. Okay. So the tailor's stove shows a low relief in the front panel, which might easily have been adapted for a quilt design. Another extremely important source of design, dear to the hearts of all women, is to be found in the decoration of her precious dishes. Many fine pieces of china with floral, bird, and animal patterns made their way to the new country, including Royal Worcester, Royal Dalton, Copeland, Spode, Lowestoft, Wedgwood, and many others. These were carefully laid away for very special use. Everyday dishes were the old blue Staffordshire ware with scenes in the centers of the plates and platters and decorative borders on the edges. At first, the scenes were of England, but the astute potters soon realized that American buyers much preferred American scenes. Hence, to flatter their customers, they put on their dishes such prints as the beauties of America or picturesque view of the Hudson River. Some potters sent artists to make faithful reproductions in oil or in ink of their impressions of the scenery of the new country. They also made portraits of such national heroes as Washington, Franklin, and Lafayette, and even pictured battles of the War of 1812. And you can imagine, I mean, we've seen what these, it's like their transferware, I think is what these specific pieces of china would have been called. The blue willow china, I can't remember if that's Staffordshire or Wedgwood, I don't know. But that blue willow pattern, actually I have about a half a set of it from probably the early 20th century. But you guys know what this stuff looks like. You've seen it before. Historical scenes were placed in the center of the plates or platters, and around them were garlands of roses, lilies, and other flowers. Butterflies, birds, and animals also found their way into these borders. Each potter had his own arrangement. After the eagle became the national emblem, it appeared as a design in many different ways. Somebody just sent me a gorgeous bicentennial quilt with an enormous eagle right in the center of it today. I'm like, oh, love it. It was carved into ships' figureheads. It was scratched into powder horns, and among many things, it was used in applique on quilts. Also in the borders of many of the plates, or as a detail of the design, the eagle often appears. The 13 stars of the original states were used. The seal of the New Republic, with the bald-headed eagle, with an olive branch in one talon and arrows in the other, and with a scroll inscribed E Pluribus Unum, decorated many pieces of Staffordshire. Other favorite subjects of pottery for the American market were mottos, morals, proverbs, and maxims of Franklin. And, there's this mention of all this here that she's talking about, and I don't know if she's going to get there. She may not mention it, but, our founding fathers were popular, these things that have happened in the U.S. and geography, scenery, battles, etc. It's happening in fabric too. You may have heard of a particular toile called the Apotheosis of Washington and Franklin, and it is an image, and what you see here on the screen is a different toile, but that Apotheosis is very, very popular. It's very famous. I can't tell you off the top of my head how apotheosis is spelled. I think it's A-P-O, no, A-P-O-T-H-E-O, apotheosis. I think it probably is spelled how it sounds. But if you look that up, you'll see something that's very familiar looking to you. And I know a number of quilt history people who have studied it extensively. So let's see, an illustration on page 149. Oh, Lord. Okay. Let's see what that is. I love how they jump forward to these. 149. Of course, you get down here into the back of the book, and there's no page numbers. So how am I supposed to know what 149 is? Oh, I see what this is. Okay. Let me show you what she's talking about. So this is what she's talking about now. This plate. So this illustration is a reproduction of the Lovejoy plate, bearing upon it the Bill of Rights. In the medallions appear quotations and also the words, "the tyrant's foe, the people's friend." Where is that? Yeah, here we go. The tyrant's foe. And I guess the people's friend must be under here. I love this eagle. I mean, the eagle with the shield is so familiar, right? You know it. If you were alive during the bicentennial, you know it very well. Um, I can't quite tell what this is, but it seems to be like a Lady Liberty type of person standing there, and then this other person kneeling. Um, you see that kind of imagery a lot to denote different things. Okay. In the border are inscriptions alternating with eagles and shields. The eagles are defiant, their claws holding a sheaf of arrows and sprays of olive leaves. Scroll designs and arabesques unify the design. So, yeah. I'll just leave that one up for now. Because she's going to talk about more that I don't think she has pictures for. A prolific designer of dishes issued 3 very popular sets, which were highly prized by lovers of old china. They are the Don Quixote series, the Sir David Wilkie series, and the Dr. Syntax series. Dr. Syntax. I love that. He sounds like an evil grammatician. Dr. Syntax. The latter should be mentioned, especially in connection with quilts, because prints of the adventures of the roving doctor were also made upon cotton in the Peel Works in Lancashire and were exported to America in large quantities, where they proved as popular as in England for window curtains, bed curtains, valances, and bedspreads. These syntax prints parallel closely the design found on blue dishes that are decorated by the decalcomania process. And I think so. Decalcomania is pronounced Decalcomania. And I think decalcomania essentially is meaning decals. And that's the transfer process that was used to make these types of things. The potters in America also used many interesting motifs, which were borrowed for quilt tops. In Pennsylvania, tulip ware, the pine tree was often a reoccurring design. Also, urns of flowers, natural leaf patterns, fishes, hearts, and stars. A typical sgraffito pie plate. So, sgraffito is spelled S, the S is silent, Sgraffito. It's a sgraffito is a type of like scratching into pottery. So a typical sgraffito pie plate dated 1773 shows a bird, a heart, and a tulip in the decoration, together with a sentimental verse carefully lettered, "This dish and heart shall never part." Early American pressed glass, produced before the Civil War, can be placed in much the same category of design as the china and pottery. Among these designs, we find Ashburton, diamond thumbprint, Argus, pressed block, all suggesting mosaic patterns for pieced quilts. Then there were familiar patterns like the vine, bellflower, ivy, inverted palm, tulip, Baltimore pear, cherry, rose in snow, princess feather, bleeding heart, wildflower, among others, many of which were also the names given to quilts of the same design. Interesting. So in pressed glass and pottery, there is something called princess feather. And, I think what's interesting about princess feather is we also know it as prince's feather. And they're 2 different things, really. Um, prince's feather is, I think, referring to Prince Albert of, Prince Albert and Victoria. Princess feather, I don't know like exactly who or what that is referring to. Um, and I mean, I think the terminology princess feather comes before prince's feather. But I think that they, in terms of terminology, and we look at feather designs and quilting, I think princess and princes really refer to the same thing. The hooked rug, besides being a design source, parallels the history of quilt making in early America. Hooked or drawn in or pulled in rugs, as they were variously called in different parts of New England, differ greatly in design. They were made in those moments between the waning daylight and darkness when the busy housekeeper had a chance to sit down, and again after supper till bedtime. Love of home and the desire to have beautiful things at a time when materials were scarce was the first impulse of the hooker. The hooker. I follow a number of crochet people, and they call themselves hookers. I think that's so funny. Pull up some of these other. This is pretty cool. Is this Tyler? No, this is Harrison. It's pretty cool. The hookers. Okay, where did I just leave off? Also, there was the same innate human urge to express oneself in material, which is a common factor in all folk art. Finally, of course, it was important to many to keep up with the Joneses, and in such cases, this would be the necessary motivation to get them started. Nature offered design ideas to the rug hooker, just as it did to workers in other crafts. The nature of the material, however, offered opportunities for larger patterns. Rug hookers living near the seashore designed boats, lighthouses, compasses, anchors, capstans, wheels, fishes, and shells for their rugs, while farmhouses, huts, red schoolhouses, churches, bridges, picket fences, yards, gardens, and villages were motifs for others. Fireplaces, interiors, and clocks were also arranged in patterns. So Robin has some details for us. So princes, meaning the ownership, and princess generally refer to the same plant, Polygonum orientale, or sometimes amaranthus. Okay, amaranthus. And the same 19th century quilt pattern, with the names often used interchangeably due to oral tradition. While prince's feather originally honored the Prince of Wales, it evolved into princess feather over time. Interesting. But I really and truly feel like princess feather, I guess that's the big question. Did princess feather come because Prince, apostrophe S, that would have been much later in the century than what she's talking about right now. What she's talking about right now is generally early 19th century. Well, although, Victoria and Albert got married. Here's where I need my timeline. They got married pretty early on, I guess. So, this is just one of those things where it's kind of like, the dates. How did the dates work out, Okay. Although pets appear in quilt designs, the rug hookers featured large animals like horses, lions, tigers, and deer. Also, there were geometric designs in rugs, which might have suggested the mosaic patterns to the quilt maker. The diamonds, squares, ovals, scrolls, and tiles appear both in rugs and quilts. In fact, the range of design in both are almost identical, and in making a hooked rug, as in designing a quilt or painting a picture, there is the same element of personal preference. In her foreword to Early American Hooked Rugs, Alice Van Leer Carrick says, "That's why I hate what the old country women called boughten patches." And that is spelled Boughthen and patches. So I assume boughten means like purchased. These completely lack the naive spontaneity which women working by the fireside on snowbound afternoons or in the long hours of winter evenings were able to create upon their canvases, strips of stretched burlap with their colors, home-dyed pieces of wool, and skeins of yarn. They reflected the life around them, the cat sleeping on the hearth, their memories of gold and crimson autumn, the blue of fans upon the tall mantle. Miss Carrick also says, nowhere else, save in the pages of medieval miniaturists who worked with precisely the same feelings, do flowers bloom in the same profusion of unpremeditated art. Finally, there were all other forms of needlework to inspire the quilt maker. Let's see. Robin says a boughten does refer to store-bought rather than homemade. Yeah, that's what I figured. It's an old-fashioned way of saying bought or purchased. Let's see. Because Massachusetts was the center of maritime trade, frequent sailings from England to the port of Boston no doubt encouraged the sending of patterns to friends and relatives living in the New England settlements. Such designs descended from Anglo-Saxon embroideries and linens with crewel work, which were used for hangings during the reign of Queen Anne. During the reign of Queen Anne, the Tree of Life and other designs from the Far East were used. Chinese designs appeared, and still other suggestions came from the Dutch East Indies. Many designs were a mixture, combined by the embroiderer in her own patterns. The stitches used were the usual Jacobean crewel work, which was similar to the crewel embroidery done at court. One very famous example of American crewel embroidery is the Mary Breed bedspread, which is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was made of homespun linen in Boston in the year 1770. It is signed in the center, above a graceful floral design. Several units appear, each of which, in itself, is a work of art. So the details of this bedspread appear on page 144. All right, let's see what that is. It's probably, let's see if it's this one. Ha! So this is what she's talking about. This is kind of nifty. Look at that. This tree with all these birds on it. I like that. So this sort of Jacobean, that's that very late 18th century. Here we have her name, Mary Breed, the date, 1770. Interesting. All right, I'll leave this one up. One of the most beautiful needlepoint rugs is also to be found in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was made in Castleton, Vermont in 1835 by Zerua Higley Guernsey. There are 78 blocks in the rug, each with a different design. The rug holds together as a unit because the background of each square is black, although the black is faded a rusty brown in some squares and greenish black in others. The green color used in the rug varies and looks as if it had been obtained by dipping the cloth into yellow and then into blue, which at the time was how they made green. Another unifying element in this fascinating rug is the constant use of rose and white. In some squares, this rose becomes a brilliant red, and in every unit, white has been used as an outline or a highlight. This is something I think you commonly see in hooked rugs, that they'll use like a little line of black or white to sort of highlight something. It's something that I see is like very specific to rugs. Any one of the units of this rug would make a fine block for a quilt, and the strawberry design would be particularly lovely. Oh, I wish we could see this. I guess I could probably look it up. Any of the flower designs could easily be used in applique. The quilt is signed I think she means rug, is signed ZHG, but in one square are the letters LFM and another FB. It is said that the two squares with these latter initials were made by two young Indians who attended the medicine school in Castleton and lived at the Guernsey home. And so by two young Indians, I'm assuming she means two young Native Americans who attended this particular school. Interesting. Okay, so she moves on to say, Magazines as a design source. The illustrations in some of the early American magazines were also a design influence. I mean, if we just think about Sarah Josepha Hale and Godey's Ladies Magazine, and she's going to mention it. So the illustrations in some of the early American magazines were also a design influence. The first magazine that openly catered to women was A Gentleman and Ladies Town and Country, which was published with the avowed purpose to please rather than to wound woman, the noblest work of God. The policy of this magazine was decidedly to pamper the ladies. Okay. The second magazine to recognize the ladies was the Ladies Magazine and Repository of Entertaining Knowledge. The first edition of this magazine states, if the present work meets with the encouragement we expect, it is intended to adorn the succeeding volumes with an engraving to each number, with the addition of the newest and most fashionable patterns of needlework for gowns, aprons, etc. A book of this kind will be universally recommended in all boarding schools throughout the country, as it is to contain everything requisite to disseminate the knowledge of real life, portray virtue in the most amiable point of view, inspire the female mind, and female mind is capitalized, by the way, with a love of religion, of patience, prudence, and fortitude. In short, whatever tends to form the accomplished woman, also capitalized, the complete economist, also capitalized, and the greatest of all treasures, a good wife, also capitalized. In 1828, Sarah Josepha Hale started the Ladies Magazine in Boston, and to her is given the distinction of being the first woman editor of America. She left Boston and went to New York to become the editor of Godey's Ladies Book. She made this a truly American publication. Patterns appeared in Godey's Ladies Book, Frank Leslie's Ladies Gazette, Peterson's Magazine, and later in Harper's Bazaar, and still later in the Ladies' Home Journal and the Woman's Home Companion. These patterns included designs for quilt blocks and also for the quilted background. Designs appeared for braiding, which could be modified for quilting patterns. The tissue paper pattern came later, and various means of transferring the pattern from the paper to the cloth were devised. And that is the end of part 4. Let's see, what does part 5 look like? I think we can get into the first section of part 5. And as skinny as this book is, right? It's a very skinny book. The text is very dense. And so I think if the text had been like a little bit bigger and spaced a little bit more, this would have been a much thicker book. I think it's deceiving in the way it looks. Okay, so let's look at some other stuff here. Got left off here. We looked at that before. These are the beds we looked at before. I just love this. I think this is such a sweet pattern. That too. Okay. So here are some. My computer does not want to resolve these. There we go. Leave this one up. This is an interesting one. Look at this. Oh my goodness. What are these? So more similar, interesting looking toiles. All right, I'll leave this one up while we read at the beginning of part 5. Okay, so part 5, pieced quilts and applique quilts. Well, they are the 2 different kinds of quilts, aside from whole cloth. The earliest quilts are the pieced ones. Not true. The earliest quilts are the whole cloth quilts. Earliest quilts are whole cloth. Then we have those chintz broderie purse dealios. So yeah. So she's saying the earliest quilts are the pieced ones. These were not designed with any decorative effect in mind, but were pieced together in order to get much needed warmth in a hurry. The origin of the first quilt, the crazy quilt, we have already studied in the first chapter. Again, she's using some terminology that's a little problematic. After this came the hit and miss, in which the pieces were cut into uniform size and shape, but still without regard for color or material because there was not enough of any one kind to carry through. The next step in the growth of design was to sort the colors and arrange them in rows. This produced the Roman stripe. Here, all patches of light value were sewed together into one strip, and all of those of dark value were sewed into another strip. Then these blocks were pieced together so that there would be alternation of light and dark stripes throughout the quilt. The next variety of rectangular one-piece quilt was the checkerboard brick wall. In this design, the strips were sewed in such a way that the joining of two blocks came directly below the center of the rectangular piece above it. And so that's what I was talking about earlier about that, you slide it to the side, and that's that brick-like pattern. The effect is that of a brick wall. There was a fine opportunity here for an interesting use of color and texture, the shape being constantly the same. Another one-piece design was the honeycomb, which started the many mosaic patterns. This was made up of a series of squares with the corners cut off, making hexagons. Yeah, I guess so. If you cut the corners off of a square, you get a hexagon, right? No, you don't get a hexagon. Hexagons are six-sided. I mean, yeah, it's when you make the corners meet into a point. But if you're just clipping the corners, that's an eight-sided. Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with some of Elizabeth's theories here, what she's describing here. Real design started, however, when some venturesome quilt maker cut a rectangle diagonally across the corner. This offered a complexity of design beyond that suggested by the material and provided the opportunity for an interesting arrangement of dark and light. Out of these pieces grew the many variations of diamonds and stars. This group is known as the two-piece series of designs and include such quilts as flying birds, birds in air, and a flock of geese. All of the varieties of herringbone designs come in this classification. Again, like what she's describing versus what Dunton described, versus what Marie Webster and Ruth Finley described, I think they're all just a little bit off center. I think the way that we look at this stuff today, the evolution, because we are able to date so many more quilts, I think, and to figure out, exactly when a quilt generally was made, and we have a much easier time pointing to the influences. The original three-piece design was called the Roman square and consisted simply of three rectangles of different colors. These rectangles were usually long and narrow. Many more interesting geometric designs followed. Indeed, the women who made these certainly had to learn their mathematics. The 4 patch was the square of 2, the 9 patch was the square of 3, and on upward to the huge assortment of multiple patterns that were made. The choice of colors for these geometric designs, of which incidentally about 90% of the old pieced quilts were comprised, was an important factor in the success of these quilts. In the oldest quilts, color was used without consideration of tonal quality because the material was already dyed and the quilt maker had to use whatever she had at hand. As time went on and new materials could be purchased at reasonable cost, the quilt designer began to choose her color scheme more deliberately. As a result, her artistic sense was given ample opportunity of expression, and there was found to be no end to the ideas and contrivances of which she would resort for the creation of something original. So it's interesting to me that she's asserting that the oldest quilts, they didn't have a whole lot of choice in the tones, and that's simply not true, in my opinion. Whether we're talking about imported cloth or we're talking about home-dyed cloth, Absolutely, there are limitations, but I don't think it's accurate to say that they really couldn't plan because they were just working with what they had. I think that a lot of what she's saying here is kind of the old wives' tales of historical quilting in the United States. Um, so yeah, I think that she's focusing on something that doesn't tell the whole story. If any ordinary layman would now work out a huge star with its many hundreds of parts, he would indeed appreciate the ingenuity and skill of these early quilt makers. So, I mean, what kind of star is she talking about? A huge star quilt with many stars? Or is she talking about like a lone star, which is a huge star made of many parts? The separate tiny pieces of a pieced quilt were joined together by a seam. Because of the nature of this technique, straight lines were more general. This form of quilt making was the fundamental one in America, and it differed from the quilts of other countries. One pieced quilt is supposed to have had 30,000 pieces sewed together. These pieces were 1/4 of an inch wide and 3/4 of an inch long. Okay, like, what is this quilt? Unfortunately, the verbs to piece and to patch have been used for the same process, but this really should not be so. To piece means to join by means of a sewed seam. To patch means to sew a smaller piece of cloth onto a larger one. So that is applique, right? And I agree with her. It is thereby applied, hence the word applique. Before 1750, nearly all quilts were pieced. I don't even know that we have any quilts before 1750 except in England. So, yeah. But from this time on, the applique quilt gained favor. This type is made by laying a small patch on a larger piece in sections or blocks, and then hemming these down by means of small close stitches. It is apt to be a more complete expression of the quilter's craft because it is created out of whole cloth cut to fit into a particular planned design. There is greater freedom in this method, for the designer is not bound by any precise shape, size, or color of her block. In applique, with a wider range of chosen materials at her command, she can be just as abstract as she desires. A wonderful field in pictorial organization, that is, in space and color relationships, is offered here, with all the elements and principles of art structure that go into the composition of a painting. So here she's, I think she's applying her knowledge and experience as a trained art professional, art educator. She's right, and she's right on with that. But again, some of the dates and what she's attributing to when, I don't think are quite there. Because these fundamentals were often overlooked, many very badly designed applique quilts have been made and are still being made. This is partly due to the fact that the early designers were not trained in matters of color and form, and only those who had an inherent sense of design were successful from this point of view. Surprisingly, some women were educated, and, they may not have gone to school, but their brothers did. And so they sort of, became educated by, virtue of the family. So, again, I think some of this is a bit of a misnomer at times. It is remarkable, however, under the circumstances, how many finely composed designs were made with a feeling for proportion of line and space and distribution of color. I don't think it is remarkable. I think these women were smarter and more talented than we gave them credit for. While we have the applique technique in review, it might be well to consider some of the basic points in art structure upon which a well-designed quilt of this type was made. First, the designer considered the purpose of the quilt as a bed covering. She then looked at the piece as a whole unit of design and planned the general arrangement of shapes and colors. If a single block was to be used, a large design was usually made for the center. If many blocks were to be used, their arrangement, geometrical or otherwise, was organized and the predominant colors established. From there on, each detail was worked out according to the materials and colors to be used. The different blocks in an applique quilt were generally set together with strips of material. In the case of a single block, which was usually large enough to form the entire center of the quilt, strips and various borders were joined together one by one until the required size was obtained. We certainly saw that with some of those community quilts where there was, because it's a medallion, border after border is added until, and sometimes it's just a top and a bottom because, you want something that's rectangular and not square. This kind of quilt was organized in much the same way as an Oriental rug. A prayer rug, for instance, consisted of the main design in the center with patterned borders of various sizes surrounding it. There was endless choice of details and shapes. For instance, the center block might be square or elongated, made up of wide or narrow strips of plain colored material or that of variegated design. Because there was never any set design and no actual pattern that had to be followed, no two applique quilts were ever exactly alike in design, coloring, or material, though very broadly speaking, they followed certain traditions in the earlier days. Later on, such traditions were often departed from altogether, and fussy designs and elaborate naturalistic renderings made their appearance that were not in good taste. Fussy designs. I mean, we fussy cut. I wonder if that's like what she's referring to, or if she's just talking about designs that are like, overly wrought and fussy. I don't know. Among the very many traditional types of design which may recur in applique are the coxcomb and the princess feather. Most of these were made from red and yellow-green calicos. The rose was one of the favorite designs, and the Whig rose and the Democrat rose, or the rose of 1840, are well known. One of the most used devices in applique was the 4-block center. In many of the old quilts, these blocks were 1 yard square. Sometimes they were joined simply together so that the 4 designs formed the center. And she gives an example, which I can pull up. She's got a picture. But when I think of this 4-hand kind of thing, 4-block center, I think about that. It's the Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania eagle quilt, and it is 4 very basic looking eagles that are they're pieced onto blocks, gigantic. They're very big. And the blocks are together, put together in a way that the eagles are diagonally, their heads come together diagonally. You guys have definitely seen these quilts. There's lots of them. And that's, I think, what she's talking about here. I think that's a good example of what she's explaining. So she goes on to say, a good example of this is the cherry tree and birds. So let me see what that is. She says the center is marked by a scallop design with a floral center. Actually, the design would have been stronger if the little birds flying into the cherry tree had been used as a center design instead. The grapevine is interestingly used here as a running border. So, all right, let me find it. Okay. It is. Where are you? Right here. No, that's not it either. This maybe. No, that's not it either. Let's see. I'm way off on the. It would have to be up here somewhere. Well, goodness gracious, why can't I find what looks like the page I'm looking at? Ah. What page is this? See, these are all the pieced patterns that she's going to show. Oh, was that it? Yes, here. Oh, you guys, I skipped the picture. That's why I can't find it. I will hold this up and show you because it's actually very pretty. There's actually a lot of pictures in this book, and I did take all of them except for this page. So this is what she's talking about. And I kind of agree. I think if they're in the center, the birds were more prominent. And this is obviously just like a quarter and a little smidge of the quilt. Let's see. It doesn't say where that quilt is. If it's where it resides. Okay. The Princess Feather, appliqued in green and plain turkey red calico, is an example of the 4-block quilt. In this quilt, the blocks are joined by small pieces sewed together in the cat track design. That's interesting. I haven't heard of that. The applique border is interesting with its deep scallops. In this quilt, the background quilting is the shell design. And in the corners, a leaf pattern is used. She doesn't give a page number for this, so I don't know if this is actually something in this book or not. The slashed star is a very fine example of the quilt which was designed with the border. In this quilt, the 4 blocks are pieced, but the border is applique. The very fine quilting has a center design of rosettes and leaves. Graceful flower sprays are quilted into the plain areas. Another 4-block quilt is the forest. This design consists of 4 oak trees with 4 leaves and an 8-petaled daisy in the center. A border of oak trees completes the quilt. The quilting is in diagonals, forming diamonds with leaf sprays. Some quilts had 5 blocks of applique set together with plain blocks. An interesting example of this is the charter oak. However, in this quilt, a small single oak tree was placed in the plain block. This same oak tree appears again in the border with the patriotic eagle. The patriotic eagle. The quilt is made of blue and brown copper plate. Okay, so that she means a blue and brown copper plate fabric, which would have been a very early fabric. Another example of 5 blocks with the design alternating with plain blocks is the peony. The peony is figured green and plain red calico. The border is a tulip with serrated leaves. So I don't know, again, if what I showed you on the screen, like, do these other ones she's talking about follow that? I don't know. I kind of think not. Let's see real quick here. Let me look. Yeah, I mean, she's got a bunch of different examples here, but I don't know that she's talking about anything specific that's in here. So, well, I'm going to leave off there. Just a couple minutes before my time. So don't forget about Stitch and Glitch on Saturday, so day after tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern time on the Quilt Nerding channel on YouTube. So hope to see you there. If not, I will see you next Monday. And just a heads up, I am 90% certain I will know probably more tomorrow, but I will not be here next Thursday. Next Thursday, I am traveling on quilt nerding business, possibly. So I will not be here. Oh, good. We'll see Robin. We'll see ya some point on Saturday. And that's the thing. Stitch and Glitch, you might miss something weird, but you can pop in anytime. You never know what we're going to talk about, as the regulars do know. It devolves sometimes. So just keep that in mind, that I'm probably not going to be here next Thursday, but I will remind you on Monday. So
Have a fantastic weekend, you guys. Robin, stay cool. Druid, stay warm. Marianne, I think you said you had snow recently. You stay warm. I don't even know what to tell you guys about your weather anymore. All right, guys, take care. Love you bunches, and I will see you soon. Mwah!